here. So I'll talk a little bit about my newest book, The Dreamweavers. So The Dreamweavers is a book that takes place in ancient China, and it follows two twins whose village falls under a mysterious curse, and their grandpa gets arrested and blamed for it. So it's up to the twins, who are complete opposites, to journey together to the imperial palace to solve the mystery behind the curse and save their grandpa and save their village. And along the way, they meet some mystical characters that are common in Chinese mythology, such as the jade rabbit. So I can start by giving a brief excerpt from the book, like reading from the first few pages. This book was dedicated to my grandmother, and it's kind of like a homage to my Chinese roots, because my family's Chinese. Okay, so chapter 1. Many moons ago, there was a small village in the mountains of southern China. During the day, the village was like any other scattered across the country. But sometimes at night, just past bedtime, a remarkable thing would happen there. It would happen after the firewood cooled beneath kitchen stoves, after oil lamps winked out behind windows one by one, after conversations in each house dwindled to drowsy whispers, and a breath of quiet swept across the sleepy village. It was a time when even the rowdiest children gave up their struggle to stay awake. In the sky above, soft clouds would nestle the bright moon as its white light smeared the glassy waters of the Pearl River nearby, where schools of colorful fish slept beneath the smooth surface. None of the villagers would be awake by the time a mysterious figure emerged on one of the drifting clouds. But if any of them happened to sit up and glance outside, they'd see the hunched figure carried what looked like a fishing rod. Yet this was no ordinary fisherman. The man would sit cross-legged on the edge of the cloud, his silhouette illuminated by the bloated moon behind him. He dangled the rod in the air and then cast a line, as easily as if he were fishing from a rowboat on the river. For the next few hours, he'd quietly reel in his invisible catches and place them carefully into a porcelain jar. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he vanished into the shadows. None of the villagers ever laid eyes on him, or on the mysterious things that he placed in his jar. But I have, from my quiet place on the moon above. And I've seen two children with him on those clouds, one boy and one girl. So that's an excerpt from The Dreamweavers. I can talk a little bit about the inspiration behind it. So the idea kind of came to me in the form of an image of a fisherman sitting on a cloud, which I mentioned. And I was thinking to myself, what if instead of fishing for fish, he was fishing for dreams? And that's how the story kind of formed. And I knew I wanted it to be set in ancient China because in a lot of Chinese folklore, it's common to have dreams be a part of the story. So a lot of traditional Chinese stories, the characters would go between the real world and the dream world and kind of go back and forth. So I knew I wanted to have that mystical element. And the jade rabbit plays a really big part in the story because in Chinese folklore, in Chinese mythology, the jade rabbit is a creature that lives on the moon. It's supposed to be kind of this powerful rabbit with magical powers. So along the way, the twins, they meet the rabbit, and it kind of relates to the whole dreamlike element. So I knew I wanted two characters that kind of contrast each other in terms of strengths and weaknesses. So that's why I had the idea of twins, and I kind of gave them opposite personalities. So May, the girl, she's more like brash and emotional, and I kind of based that actually on myself because I tend to be emotional sometimes. And Yoon, the brother, he's more of a logical, cautious one, and that was actually based on my husband's personality. No, I plotted it out kind of like a bullet list in the beginning. So there's two types of writers. I heard there's the plotters and then there's the pantsers. The plotters, they kind of have the outline and then go from the beginning to the end, whereas the pantser, they kind of write free form. And I've always found myself more of a plotter. I need to have at least the bare bones like the bare structures of the book ready. So I had a vision for how it would kind of go already before I started. But even then, like when you have an outline, sometimes when you're writing, you deviate a lot from what you originally planned. So I've always wanted to be a writer since I was a child. My first stories were written in a spiral-bound notebook in the 3rd grade, and I remember just loving reading when I was a kid. So I spent a lot of time at the library, getting a new book each week. And when I went to college, I actually majored in economics, but I always enjoyed writing on the side. So even when I worked as a corporate analyst, I would go home and write at night to kind of unwind. And I always liked that better than the analytics part. So I guess, very excited to kind of be able to hold a published book these days. A lot of my favorite books were written by Roald Dahl, Louis Zecker, kind of Judy Blume. So they were kind of the authors I read during my formative years, and I can kind of, like when I write now, I think back to them mostly because they were a big influence. And I think I've always enjoyed stories where it's grounded in the real world, but there's elements of magic. So it's kind of realistic, but then something fantastical happens. And I like that because it makes you kind of wonder when you walk down the street, oh, could this maybe actually like happen to me? Or like it's fun to think about, right? Kind of like speculative fiction in a way.
That's very Roald Dahl.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking that Roald Dahl does that a lot in his books, like Matilda, where she has these telekinesis, right?
Yeah.
Telekinesis powers. But she's a real kid that goes to regular school. So one thing I really enjoy writing is how I like exploring how the past influences the present. So you see that a little in No Ordinary Thing because the characters time travel and they see each other in different points in their life, and you can kind of see how that influences their future actions. And in the same way, the Dreamweavers also has kind of 2 timelines. There's an ancient curse that happens in the story, and as you read the book, you find out what had happened in the past that brought on this curse and how it kind of affects the current generations. I think I like exploring that because it's, like, to me, I guess, it's very interesting to see how things change throughout time and how the past never really kind of lives in the past, kind of how it like lives on in the present and the future. In the Dreamweavers, there's a dice game that the twins play in order to get out of a dungeon, and I actually asked my college professor for help in calculating the exact probabilities of rolling the dice. So it's all in the appendix, actually. It's if you're also curious about mathematics. So one takeaway I want readers to get from the Dreamweavers is your value is not defined by your family name, but by the choices you make. So Mei and Yoon, they come from a poor village in the mountains, and in the story, they go to the Imperial Palace and meet all the royal children. And along the way, they kind of realize they're not that much different from each other. So I think in ancient China, it was common for people to place a lot of emphasis on their family name. I think even nowadays, sometimes people say, oh, I come from a family of lawyers or doctors, but it's actually your choices that define you.